What's going on, Packer fans? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Always appreciate you joining me. Want to talk some Jordan Love and his progress, or maybe lack thereof. More on that in just a moment. But before we get there, I want to talk a little bit about Odell Beckham, Packers special teams. Want to maybe talk about the Vikings coaching search. But quick news and notes. I'm going to start by actually talking about the Pro Bowl, which is about as rare as it can possibly get for me because I don't care about the Pro Bowl at all. But if you do, to each their own, no judgment there. I know at one time I certainly did. So like I said, no judgment. But let's start off by going over the fact that Green Bay currently has no players that are set to attend the Pro Bowl. Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, Kenny Clark, all who were voted in initially, no longer will be playing due to, I guess, injuries. Who knows if they're really beat up to the point of not being able to play, or they just didn't have any real interest, but they will not be playing in the game. Meanwhile, the Packers coaching staff, of course, will be there coaching the NFC team, just without any players and actual, G on their helmet to coach. But it's not the worst thing in the world that anytime you get to go coach football in Vegas. I'm sure Matt LaFleur and the rest of the coaching staff aren't going to be too upset. Great way to get to see some of these ultra talented players in person and maybe, pitch how great, it is to work with LaFleur and his staff in Green Bay at some point. So you never know what can potentially happen there. But I think the news there is that Green Bay, as of this point, does not have any players in the Pro Bowl, which if you would have told me a month and a half ago that Green Bay didn't have any players playing in the Pro Bowl, would have probably said was a pretty good sign of what happened in the playoffs. Fortunately, that's not the case. Green Bay goes home early and still has no players playing in the Pro Bowl. So let's move on to a different topic. Let's talk about the Minnesota Vikings. Another thing I'm not usually going to lead off with, but Minnesota has seemingly narrowed down their coaching search, either by default in one case, with DeMeco Ryans taking his name out of the coaching search. So 49ers defensive coordinator was set to have a second interview, and he declined. He's no longer going to go for the Vikings job and is going to stay with San Francisco as their defensive coordinator. So that is a pretty big development. I thought Ryans would have been one of the top candidates for the Vikings, but he pulls his name out. Now, sometimes that can be like he read the tea leaves and realized that he wasn't going to get that job anyway. So maybe that could be the case. That doesn't look great for the Vikings when you have one of the top coaching candidates and they're just like, I'm out. But I don't think the optics matter all that much here. Ultimately, it just means that DeMeco Ryans won't be the head coach. There are a few that are left, however, and that includes Raheem Morris, who just finished up his second round of interviews. Kevin O'Connell just finished up his second round of interviews with the Vikings. Jim Harbaugh will be in the building for a second interview coming up, as will Patrick Graham, the Giants defensive coordinator. So it seems like Minnesota, is down to 4 defensive coordinator candidates, including, again, Raheem Morris, Kevin O'Connell, Jim Harbaugh, and Patrick Graham. I gotta say, these aren't like a massively devastating group of candidates if you were a Packers fan. I think Kevin O'Connell is the one that maybe is the most intriguing and has the most upside. I think Patrick Graham would do a really nice job, but defensive coach, I don't know, just doesn't move the needle a ton. I think Jim Harbaugh, as I mentioned the other day, could go a couple different ways. I think this could just be John Gruden 2.0, where you pay him a ton of money and it just never works out. Or maybe it's the classic Jim Harbaugh curve, if you will, or story arc, where he comes in and he sort of gets the franchise back on the right foot and you see some confidence grow, and he has maybe 3 to 4 years of good coaching, good football, maybe even a NFC championship game or something in there, but doesn't ultimately win it and ultimately wears out his welcome, which he has done basically everywhere. And that's the end of Jim Harbaugh in Minnesota. I think you can live with that. Raheem Morris is an interesting candidate. I think he probably learned from his first coaching stint and has become one of the best defensive minds in all of football. I think that certainly would make things difficult. Wouldn't surprise me at all if that's the direction that they went with. But again, I don't think that these are like a devastating group of coaches. Time will tell. You can never really know until they get in the building and start running their program the way that they want to. But as of right now, Raheem Morris, Kevin O'Connell, Jim Harbaugh, and Patrick Graham seem to be the finalists for that Vikings head coaching job. Before we get to Jordan Love, one other topic here, and that is, I talked about Darren Rizzi, and I've talked about, maybe Green Bay messing up that hire in 2019 where they go with Sean Menenga instead of Darren Rizzi. And I think there's been a lot of talk lately about how Green Bay messed up with not getting Odell Beckham. I will gladly look you in the eye and tell you I was wrong on that. I did not think that Odell Beckham would be a piece that Green Bay would miss out on. I thought he was one of the most overrated players in the league. I didn't think he added as much as people thought to either New York or Cleveland. He has added a ton to the Rams, and I don't believe the Rams would be in the Super Bowl had it not been for Odell Beckham. And I think you can make a very strong argument that the Packers would be in the Super Bowl, or at least would have beat San Francisco. I think now you go up against the Rams who don't have Odell. I think Green Bay probably goes to the Super Bowl if they have Odell Beckham. I think you can make that argument. And going back to Darren Rizzi, I think you can make an argument that if they were able to seal that deal with him maybe a couple years ago, that this special teams is immeasurably better now than they were at that time. You certainly probably don't lose a game to the 49ers due to the special teams, not in the fashion that they lost. I think you could look at that as being a major difference maker in this playoffs and just for the Packers in general as well. So I think you can put blame on the Packers, look to the Packers and say, how did you not seal deals with Darren Rizzi and how did you not find a way to get Odell Beckham to Green Bay? But what I do want to caution here and what I do want to remind people of, as Aaron Rodgers so eloquently put it in the offseason, Green Bay is not exactly a vacation destination. Green Bay is not 1A on most players' lists or coaches' lists, and there are players and coaches who simply don't really want to go to Green Bay, especially at this time of year. Understandably, I don't even want to be in Green Bay, and I'm here, and I have family here, and I would gladly move, even though I'm, obviously covering the Packers and doing everything else. Give me the warm weather. I'm on board with that, but I digress. My point being is that there have been rumblings out there that one of the reasons that a deal didn't get done with Darren Rizzi is because that his family didn't want to move to Green Bay, and he gave Green Bay a very high contract number to try to meet. I cannot confirm that, but there have been those rumblings out there. If that's the case, if you're Green Bay, there might just be a number for a special teams coordinator that you can't meet. And they might say, you know what, we've got faith in these other coordinators and we're not going to pay this coach way over market value and make him the highest, paid special teams coordinator by far. And again, I can't confirm that that was the case. But if that was the case, you can understand where maybe Green Bay says we're going to have to go in a different direction. You always have a budget, and potentially that didn't fall within the budget of maybe paying top tier money for a special teams coordinator. You can argue it should have, but that clearly was not the case. And it's quite possible that Rizzi was just asking too much. And that may have been in large part due to not wanting to coach in Green Bay. Again, that's the buzz that's out there. As far as Odell Beckham, you can say the same thing. Green Bay financially couldn't exactly do what the Rams did to give him the contract that they gave him to go to LA. The reports have been that he preferred to go to LA to play with the Rams, to play in Hollywood. And you can sort of understand that and see that, right? He played in New York. He played in Cleveland. These are two, colder weather friends. Now he gets to go to LA. He gets to go to Hollywood and be a key receiver within that team. You can understand it, right? So it's easy to bash the Packers and say, well, why didn't they get Darren Rizzi? And why didn't they get Odell Beckham? And why didn't they get X, Y, and Z? Like Charles Woodson, we've gone over that story, a million times. Everyone has, right? Green Bay had to way overpay for Charles Woodson at the time just to get him to come to Green Bay. And you can maybe argue again that with Darren Rizzi, hey, if you want your guy and he doesn't want to come to Green Bay, you might have to pay more to do that. But ultimately what I'm trying to say here is that it's easy just to bash the Packers and say, well, why didn't you get this special teams coordinator? Why didn't you get Odell Beckham or somebody else, whoever you want to insert there? It's not always that easy. It's not just Madden where whoever has the most salary cap and is offering the most money can get that deal done. Sometimes if things are even close, they're going to go to maybe a warm weather climate or a place that they'd rather be that's not Green Bay, Wisconsin. Green Bay does have to fight against that at times. And maybe that wasn't it. Maybe it had nothing to do with it. Maybe Darren Rizzi just wanted to be one of the top paid special teams coordinators and Green Bay didn't want to do that, which was a mistake, not probably was a mistake. Maybe Odell Beckham, if Green Bay would have upped their offer a little bit, maybe he would have been in Green Bay. We don't know for sure, but it's at least worth noting that this isn't just as easy as saying well, you should have just offered a bit more and matched the other price. If everything's equal, a lot of times they're going to go with the other franchise, especially if both franchises are competing for a Super Bowl, like in the case of Beckham where the Packers and the Rams were. So I will gladly admit that I was wrong about Beckham, and he's made a massive impact. I remember I was watching, of course, the beginning of this Rams 49ers game, and Cooper Kupp keeps on getting single covered, and I'm like, oh, great. Now you don't cover the team's, double cover the team's best receiver. You double Devontae all game. Why the heck aren't you double? Oh, right. Because they have Odell Beckham on the other side. It mattered. It mattered a lot with how San Francisco tried to defend the Rams, and it would have mattered a lot had he have been in Green Bay. Like I said, I was wrong on that. I think he would have made an impact. Now, Ty Dunn points out on Twitter as well, it's tough to get more open than Allen Lazard was on the last route of the game, and Rodgers didn't hit him and didn't see him and didn't have much success or interest in throwing the ball deep down the field. So we can talk about wide receivers, but at the same token, when your guys are open, you got to find them and got to hit them. And Rodgers didn't do that in that game either. So maybe Beckham doesn't matter, but I think he ultimately does. His run after the catch, his ability to take some pressure off of Devontae, I think it would have been huge, but you can't just go ahead and say, well, they should have just done that. It's not quite that easy. All right, let's move to Jordan Love, and I want to spend just a little bit of time going over Jordan Love's progress, where he's currently at, maybe the lack of progress, and I want to kind of split this into what we do know and what we don't know about Jordan Love, because I think we don't know a ton, right? I'm going to go over a lot of the things we do know, but we don't know a ton. I think it's still very early to jump to any conclusions. I know that there are people that immediately want to bury him and say he's not going to be good. The same thing was said about Aaron Rodgers in year 2. The same thing was said about Devontae Adams in year 2. A lot of the same things were said about Rashawn Gary in his second year when he hadn't taken a jump yet. Again, if any franchise should know, it takes time, and some players click at different moments. It should be Packer fans. I think it's way too early to go there, but more on that in a moment. So let's start off with what I think at this point we do know. I think we do know, unless something changes drastically in the next few weeks, just based on Matt LaFleur's press conference and how they handled the entirety of last season, I think it's very clear that Green Bay, the Packers, the organization, the front office, and it's certainly, if we're taking Matt LaFleur at his word, that Gutekunst and Russ Ball and Mark Murphy and Matt LaFleur are all in lockstep on this decision, I think we can say that Green Bay is not ready to make the move to Jordan Love. And that's probably the biggest thing that we know, and it's probably the biggest sign, right? Because if Jordan Love is ready, going back to last year, if they felt he was ready last year, Aaron Rodgers looks like the bad guy. They trade Rodgers away. They get a ton of picks in, a ton of players in. You move to Jordan Love, you help your salary cap, and you move forward with your new stud quarterback. They didn't do it then. They have another opportunity now to probably trade Rodgers for multiple first-round picks, maybe some players in exchange, and move forward with Jordan Love. If Jordan Love is anywhere remotely ready, you have to do that. You have to take the ROI that you would get from a big Aaron Rodgers trade, go into the future, start letting him get those reps, and start building that next quarterback up to be your franchise guy. The fact that they are not willing to do that is probably the biggest tell that there is not faith within the organization that Jordan Love can go out and compete at a high level. Does that mean he's a bust? Not yet, but he's not there yet. He's not ready yet. And to me, that's the biggest thing that we know. And again, the biggest sign that, all right, maybe Jordan Love's progression hasn't really come along as I think maybe Green Bay and Brian Gutekunst would have hoped when they made that initial selection. We do know that he's had multiple weeks to practice with the ones, and he had that prior to Detroit. We know that he got a lot more reps this year than he did last year. We know that there had to have been at least a little accident forgiveness in his rookie year due to all the COVID protocols and it just not being the same. He was the number 3 quarterback behind Rodgers and Boyle. But last year, this past year, he had the opportunity to get not only all the number 2 reps, but almost all the number 1 reps for a huge chunk of time while Rodgers was dealing with his toe injury. So we know that progression should have picked up because of all those reps and because of all the time that he got practicing as the guy and practicing with the ones week in and week out. We know that he's only going to be going into his 3rd year. All right. However, what I will say here is that by this time, by the 3rd year, in general, you know what quarterbacks are going to become. And it takes usually the 3rd year. So he kind of has this year as well. But I'll look at some of the top quarterbacks right now in the league. Joe Burrow, you saw it right away. You saw it year 1. Tom Brady, you saw it year 1. Josh Allen, you saw it that was the one that was like year 3. But you saw flashes in year 2. He wasn't there yet. Made a lot of mistakes, and there were a lot of people that were still burying him in year 2. Year 3 was the year he broke out big time. So maybe there's a little time, but for the most part, you started to see those flashes in year 2. Year 3 was the year he broke out. Justin Herbert, we saw it right away. Kyler Murray, we saw it right away. Dak Prescott, we saw it right away. Mac Jones, we saw flashes this year. Patrick Mahomes, even in those last games, I think in year 1 we saw, but year 2 we for sure saw in Patrick Mahomes. Matt Ryan was right away. Russell Wilson was right away. Lamar Jackson was right away. The best quarterbacks in this league you saw by at minimum year 3. Now, a few small exceptions. Aaron Rodgers, of course, being the one. More on that in just a moment. Ryan Tannehill, although I think that there were more flashes with Tannehill early, even in those first couple years, than we've seen with Jordan Love so far. Kirk Cousins, we even saw some flashes in Washington early, but it took him a little bit longer to get going. But Tannehill was, to me, more about going to a better team and not an awful Dolphins team. Of course, getting over the injury as well. I think that was more scenery change than it had anything to do with the quarterback. And Cousins and Rodgers were back a little bit in different times. Rodgers had all the time to sit behind Brett Favre and, sort of go through all the quarterback camps with Mike McCarthy and everything like that, and had that time. So it was a little bit different back in the day. There's not as much time anymore to be able to go through all of that. There just isn't. It doesn't exist anymore. Same thing to an extent with Kirk Cousins. RG3 was the guy. He had more time to develop on the bench, which again, we will see with Jordan Love as well. But different time, again, more practice reps. The training camp wasn't quite as limited. And when he got his opportunity, he was pretty much, you saw what he was almost from the beginning. So a couple exceptions, but for the most part, when quarterbacks have been great, you've seen it by year 3. So this is going into his 3rd year, and we haven't seen any real signs of anything yet. So that, to me, is a little bit of a red flag and something that we do know at this time. Now, we also know that he flashed immensely in his sophomore year and showed tremendous talent, tremendous arm talent, the ability to ad-lib and make plays. He made plays from within the pocket. You would see him go through progressions at times. His sophomore year tape was incredible. We also know that he hasn't really been the same since then. His junior year wasn't the same. He had basically the redshirt year in Green Bay, and then failed to make much of an impression even when given an opportunity in training camp, preseason, and even a game and a half in the regular season this year when given the opportunity. So yes, there are some insane highlights and high-level play his sophomore year, but hasn't really been the same since then. We know that he has struggled against KC in Detroit when given opportunities. KC was a bit of a nightmare game that, like, Green Bay just never showed any sign of rhythm, couldn't get the run game going. The offensive line couldn't pick up a blitz to save their life. But Jordan Love didn't look fully prepared for that game. I definitely put some blame on the offense and the play calling as well. But that was a brutal first impression, really like a true first impression for Jordan Love. And then Detroit started off okay, but those last 2 drives certainly did not go according to plan. Again, some accident forgiveness based on how those things happen, but his first real, game and a half of real action, not much to write home about in those specific games. And going along with that, we just haven't seen much on tape yet. You guys know, I'm watching every player on every play. I can't show you a handful of Jordan Love plays and just be like, look at these 5 plays in Green Bay. Ignore everything else and just look at these 5 great plays, and this is going to tell you what he's going to become. He doesn't have that yet. His portfolio as a member of the Green Bay Packers is rather empty. I'm not saying he didn't make a couple nice plays here and there. He did. But there's nothing that you can point to and be like, this is a repeatable process that he can go through week in and week out and make these throws consistently and be a consistent NFL quarterback. That is not there yet. We also know that he hasn't been exactly put in the greatest of positions. Listen, the game against Kansas City, as I mentioned, the game plan was awful. That's the loudest stadium in the NFL. It's a primetime game. Like, everything was not great. And then Green Bay blocked everything up poorly. The Green Bay's offense as a whole didn't execute. It wasn't just Jordan Love. So that was not a great position to be put in. He gets in the second half against Detroit with a lot of Juwan Winfreys and backups, and it was not an ideal situation either. Again, on the road, led 3 straight scoring drives until the defense lets the Lions score a touchdown, and then he's got to try to go and put a 2-minute drill to win the game. Doesn't go according to plan. Has some bad luck on those drives as well. But I don't think you can say like, oh, he's been put in great position. He just hasn't. So I don't think we can like fully judge him yet until we get a look at, all right, what does he look like in ideal circumstances? We also knew going in that he was going to take time to develop. This was always a project quarterback. This was never somebody that was likely to come in year 1 or year 2 and just start tearing it up. He was going to take some time. And so this isn't out of his career progression path. And oh, by the way, he just turned 23 in November. There will be quarterbacks taken early in this draft that are at or older than Jordan Love. And he has 2 years in the NFL of progressing towards hopefully what his next step is. So we knew it was going to take time. We knew he was young coming out, and this is still within the realm of what we sort of expected his progression to be. I think we can also say that it's not trending great overall. I don't think the intervals of like how he's improved have been good enough. I don't think you can look at, from college to year 1 to right now and say like, man, he's really made some progress. And again, that goes back to the tape and saying like, what can you point to and say, all right, this is what he's got down. I think there's some things. I think he's run the offense okay at times. You can see some of the, like baked in plays that he runs with a little bit more, efficiency, like cadence is coming along, his command, like some things are coming along, but I don't think it's trended well enough so far. And again, I think it speaks volumes in the fact that Green Bay hasn't wanted to move forward and pull that trigger and say, hey, it's time to go to Jordan Love. As I mentioned earlier, I think there's only so much time for development in today's NFL. This isn't early Aaron Rodgers era where you have all that time to develop. And again, I don't think you see quite the progressions. When quarterbacks are bad early, whether it's Mitch Trubisky or Deshaun Kaiser or whomever, whatever quarterback that you want to put in that, a lot of them stay bad. It just happens to be what it is. You usually start to get a feel in the first couple of years, and I said at least by year 3, if this player is going to cut it or not. So I'm not saying it's like a death sentence for Jordan Love. And like I said, this was always sort of the expectation of him coming out, but there's only so much time left for him, to develop. And again, I don't think we've seen those real signs of development quite yet the way that I think Green Bay and certainly the fans would have hoped. I also don't think we hear any real like rumblings of like, oh, it's time to go to Jordan Love. Like usually you'll hear of like maybe if a quarterback's really starting to push and look good in practice, you might hear some rumblings of it of like, okay, like Green Bay's got something in this kid and he's going to push Aaron Rodgers. We haven't heard any of that. We haven't heard any leaks from any players of like, maybe it's time to move to Jordan Love. I think that ultimately could be a little bit telling as well. We also know that when he has got in, and again, this kind of goes back to the tape before, but PFF in their grading system, same with me, I didn't have a great grade on him obviously either, but they have a 36.2 grade on Jordan Love this season. Just for, sort of litmus test or whatever you want to put it, like Mendoza line. Ben Roethlisberger was the lowest consistent starter in the league this year, and he had a grade of 53. So Love was at 36.2. If you remember, Tim Boyle got sort of like the same amount of playing time and start, like a little bit more than what Jordan Love did. Tim Boyle had a 54.0 grade, and he struggled, right? Like it wasn't great. He struggled, and he had a 54 grade. Jordan Love a 36.2. I think the last thing we do know is that you don't want to give up on the talent quite yet. And like, what's the upside, right? Yeah, if some team comes and says like, hey, we had a really high grade on Jordan Love, we're willing to give you a first round pick or a first round pick and a player. Yeah, you probably listen if you're not buying into Jordan Love at this point. If you're Brian Gutekunst, you get maybe a player that can help you this year, maybe a first round pick in return, and you just go in a different direction. It didn't work out, no harm, no foul. Then you can live with that. I don't think any team's offering that. I don't think Jordan Love has given any indication that he is that player that a team wants to, give up a first round pick for and move forward with him as their starter like immediately. I just don't think he's shown it in preseason. I don't think he's shown it in regular season. I don't think there's been that sort of buzz. So unless you're getting blown away with an offer, it makes a lot more sense for him to stay on your roster and still see if you can ultimately hit on him because the talent is still there. It just hasn't really been unearthed yet. And again, as we know, it takes players different ages, different times, whatever, to sort of figure that out. And you never know when they may click. And again, we've seen that in Green Bay on numerous occasions. Here's the things we don't know. We don't know that he's a bust. I don't think we can label him as that as of yet. I think that's very aggressive. I think it's just wrong. I think, again, until he gets consistent playing time, and we see him probably as a season as a starter, and with the players around him that he needs to succeed, and like to see if he progresses throughout that season, I think it's way too early to say like, well, give up on Jordan Love. He's a bust. It's over with. Again, he's 23 years old, just turned 23 in November. There's a lot of time left here for Jordan Love, and I don't think we can label him quite yet. I don't think we know that like he can't break through. Again, I think there's a world that exists where all of a sudden it clicks for Jordan Love and he becomes a really good quarterback. What level that is, top 5, top 10, top 15, top 20, I don't know. But I think there's a world that exists where it does click for Jordan Love at some point. He gains command of this offense. He gains understanding. He gains just confidence in what he's doing on a down-by-down basis. And all of a sudden, instead of thinking on every play, he just starts flinging the ball around and using his God-given ability. If that happens, look out. Is it, again, trending in that way? It's not. But I don't think you can just say like, it's never going to happen. That easily still could. I think there's a world somewhere in the multiverse that happens. And maybe this is the one, maybe it's not. This is what the Oracle told Morpheus. I don't know what you're waiting for. Maybe another life. We'll see if he can become the one. As of right now, he is not. Again, I don't think we can know a ton until we see an offense that's more tailored around Jordan Love and his skill set. And I don't think we've seen that yet. I don't think we have a great view of like how he's processing the checks, the playbook, the cadence, and all that other stuff. I think the coaches probably have a feel of that, but I don't think we quite yet know. It doesn't look like he's really comfortable going through his progressions and the checks. We know that he doesn't have autonomy at the line of scrimmage yet, so I think those things still need to develop, but tough to gauge that on where he's at right now. Like I said, I think we still could see an aha moment at some point, but again, I don't think we know whether that's going to happen or not. And ultimately, I don't think we know if he can ever be a serviceable quarterback in this league, good, bad, or indifferent. I think there's a lot of unknowns that still surround Jordan Love. So if people have asked me this all the time. They're like, Andy, okay, like, how are you feeling about Jordan Love? Like, cut the crap. Just give me it straight. How do you feel about Jordan Love? I would say I don't think it's progressing great. I don't think it's going, according to plan. And I don't think that he's in a spot where Green Bay trusts him yet. And I just think even when Matt LaFleur is asked about him, you can tell he has a little hesitation and trepidation when he answers about Jordan Love. I don't think there's anything that I've seen yet that has been like, yeah, it's going to happen at some point. That said, I still believe far too early to give up on him. And we as Packer fans should know better than anyone that these things can still happen and things could still click for him. So that's where I'm at. I think it's ridiculous and silly to give up on him or call him a bust at this point. But I think it's up to Jordan Love now to say, like, it's time to take a step. It's go time. Because whether it's this year or very near future, the time of Aaron Rodgers is coming to an end. And it's time to be prepared to be the starting quarterback of the Green Bay Packers. And it's clear to me that Green Bay doesn't feel he's there yet. And I don't feel he's there yet. And I don't think Jordan Love probably feels like he's there yet. So it's go time. And we're reaching a point in the next couple of years where there's going to be a now or never moment. Like I said, year 3 is the telltale. He's going into year 3. Time to step up. That's going to do it for me today. Thanks for joining me. Always appreciate it. I'll be right back here tomorrow with an all-new episode. But until next time, and as always, go Pack, go.